Welcome back. You tuned into Mid Morning Live, and with me, your host Mariam Mia. And now I'm so excited because I'm going to be speaking to seasoned, veteran, experience radio personality and television personality, Joanne Joseph, who is now an author. She's authored a novel, and it's Children of Sugarcane. And for me, when I read this, it's something I didn't think about, and I actually felt it's right. It's a segment of this journey of the indentured labors that made to South Africa the female version. Because when even in my mindset, when I thought about indentured labors, in my mind it was only male. I, for some reason, up until this point, I did not ever think about females making this journey, coming here, working as indentured laborers on the sugarcane fields. And many South Africans of Indian descent, they can trace their family roots via this indentured laborer system. And when I think of how far uh, we've come in terms of our journey and how Indians have contributed to all spheres of South African life, it fills me with pride that we've integrated so well into communities. We've aired positively in all spheres, be it Joanne being and myself in the media space as well, in education, in government, in sector, in corporates as well. But it's stories like these that shape our identity and raise the profile of the hardships that many families had to endure in terms of getting here and where we are now. And Joanne's book is really, the message behind it is so powerful in terms of understanding what females went through, what mothers went through, and also children that were born here under this indentured labor system. So the novel says a transporting novel of love, caste, and poverty amidst colonial South African Indian diaspora. So let me welcome Joanne Joseph to Salam Media. Good afternoon, Joanne, and welcome to Salam Media.
Hi, Mariam Mia. Thank you so much for having me today.
It's an absolute pleasure, and I must say, you say in this article in the Sunday Times that it's a segment of South African history that is very much neglected, because I put up my hand and I didn't ever think about females. Whenever I thought about this passage that our forefathers undertook, making this journey to the southern tip of Africa, in my mind, it was always males. It was always males. It was never a female. And yes, you opened my mind to something. And then, I just, it was like a minefield, and so many things came to mind, and I was filled with so much emotion. For me, you just opened up something else for me in terms of creating awareness.
Oh, thank you, Mariam Mia. I'm really glad to hear that actually. But I mean, I don't blame you. Most of us, when we are told the story of indenture, and I should say, if we're told the story of indenture, because it's not something that's widely spoken about, as you said, focuses much on the story of men who got onto these ships just over 160 years ago to come to South Africa and various other places all over the world where the British entrenched indenture. And as a result, I mean, if you look at the numbers, for example, so for every 100 men that were brought to South Africa for indenture, only 50 women were allowed. And the British did not want the women here in the first place. They were stereotyped as these kind of reproductive machines that were just going to come here, make babies, use the resources of the British Empire, and simply not contribute in any way to the enterprise that the British were building here at the time. So they very begrudgingly allowed women to come along as well. And many women did come along, though. Some of them came as single women. Some of them were escaping, in the case of my protagonist in this fiction novel, an escaped marriage. But there were women, who were facing brutality in their own homes in India. They were facing the fact that their records had been expunged altogether once their husbands died and they became widows. They were looking for new opportunities away from a society that was also culturally and religiously oppressive in many ways, and compounded by the presence of the British, which made it even tighter noose around their neck. And so many women used this as an opportunity to come to South Africa and to try and build a better life for themselves and for their families as well.
And when you're speaking, the famous adage, history repeats itself, because I think of countries in West Africa and
Mm-hmm.
Central Africa where females escape maybe gender mutilation, and then they take the first plane into Europe and then seek asylum there for same reason. I'm thinking about Indian culture and caste system, and as you've said, women are still very, very much marginalized in Indian societies in 2022. So I can't imagine what was it like in the 1800s for females. And that time, I mean, the system, you were born into the system, and that almost there you were born, your destiny was laid out for you. It was like you were just a passenger in this journey of life,
Yes.
and you had no say. So I'm thinking of what it must be like in 1880, without advocacy groups, without people being a voice for the marginalized or platform for the marginalized. And for you wanting to, you come from a difficult circumstance, wanting to escape only to find a different type of oppression once you get on the other side.
Yes. And I love that description you use, being a passenger in your own life, because today, people like you and I, living in a modern constitutional democracy, despite its many inadequacies, are able to make decisions about our own lives and choose so many things that were not available to women in the past and are still not available, as you point out, to many other women living in certain parts of the world where the systems do remain so oppressive that they cannot make these fundamental decisions about their own lives. But of course, we know these young girls were born into families where the arranged marriage was a way of life. If you were on the lower rungs of the caste system, then that hierarchy dictated what your life would be. You could not easily shift caste unless the family came into a lot of money. Even if you did, if you managed to do that, there was still a marker of caste somewhere in your name, so that people knew that you sat on the lower rungs of the social ladder at some point. So caste was a devastating thing in the lives of women. I mean, there's a story, for example, told in one of the books written by a doctor called Girmit Tales, and many of his patients related the story to him. But essentially, what happened is, in this particular instance, there's a story of a young woman who belongs to the washerwoman caste. She goes out one day with a group of girls her age. They're young girls, they're sort of teenagers by this time. And they go out to wash clothes at the river. And she becomes somehow isolated from the group. And the group moves on without her. And she's surrounded by a gang of men who gang rape her. And that story tells us about the deep shame that she feels at what has happened to her. She cannot tell her parents what has happened to her. She cannot reveal to her family, because then a stain will be put upon her, and no one will want to marry her, which is the absolute worst sort of fate that can befall a young woman in that situation. And so she escapes. She gets on a ship to South Africa, and she comes to Port Natal in the hope that she can erase that stain and begin a new chapter entirely where nobody knows what actually happened to her. So that's an example of the kinds of stories that existed. So these were real stories about people that I've incorporated into the book, women in particular. And of course, the danger remains. Even when you get out of India, you get onto a ship where your life is endangered, where your integrity is endangered, your bodily integrity is endangered by the British men on the ship, as well as other Indian men that you're with. And when you get onto the plantations or the Natal government railways, wherever it is you end up working, again, you face that constant danger. So these women were really the survivors of terrible predation all along the way.
And well, the catalyst or the spark for your book was actually your PhD in African literature, and you focused on, like you say, female indentured labors in South African indentured literature. But another, I think, spark or a catalyst comes from um, finding out your family roots and tracing that, and then you looked up your great grandmother and you decided, I mean, that curiosity we all, I don't know, I also find now I'm at a time in my life where I want to know more about who I am in terms of my roots, who was my family. And I look at myself as a strong woman. I keep on asking my dad, because my grandparents have passed on both sides, and I'm trying to ask him, from all your aunts you've met and you've interacted with, who are the strong women who you could see, because I'm trying to see who I can identify with, because even in those times there were strong personalities. And your grandmother, from what you said, seems to be an iconic, very, very strong person, having endured what she had. So was that the catalyst for your book, your PhD, as well as going into the family archives?
Yes, that was a very useful exercise for me, and funny enough, it is triggered by all sorts of things that are happening in your own life as you get older. And I've had my daughter in 2006, and that was when the process of thinking about these things started. What history am I going to pass on to my daughter? Will she ever know about the people who came before me, and her grandmother? So that was what sparked the investigation, and then I realized that, as you say, these were women who were caught up in a very dark corner of history, but they were not powerless as they are sometimes made out to be. In a manner of speaking, they're tragic heroines, because the system does press down on them. It does oppress them. It does deprive them of rights and a decent life. But at the same time, they find ways to rebel against the system and to fight it. And that is one of the most powerful things that we perhaps don't realize. Perhaps you have come to that realization as a person, and you are searching for that female ancestor, through, whose genes that power has now finally arrived to birth itself in you. But of course, these women from the past were very powerful women, in the sense that they were stoic, they endured a great deal of hardship. This is not to romanticize their resilience, because there can be the tendency to do that, especially when people are living under a system of great subjugation like indenture or apartheid, colonization in general. But it is to say that there was a reality in which they lived that was extremely difficult. It made life, really an atrocious experience for them, and yet they were able to somehow rise above those circumstances by using their wits, by caring for their children, ensuring they were deeply protected, that they were educated. There were all of these notions of a vision for a future, essentially, in them, where they saw that if they invested in their children right now, if they sent them to school, for example, they would not just be catering for the incremental success of one generation. They would be laying the foundations for the success of many generations above them or in front of them that they would never even see. And that thought alone, that kind of visionary thinking is quite astonishing for women who lived 160 years ago. But you're quite right to say that thread runs through, and it's an interesting journey to go back and locate it and see where it may have started. And in your present day life as a woman, it gives you new perspectives, especially when you are facing difficulties. My great-grandmother went through very, very difficult things, far more difficult things than I did. And she was able to cope with these things. And there's something of her in me. And I have to believe that I will come through this okay. And that gives you a great deal of courage at times when you are lacking.
Absolutely. And it just gives you that motivation to continue to say, you know what, it's in my genes. For me, if you want to just say that, and it just propels you further to say, and that's what I've now come to say, what, this is in my genes and I will persevere. And
Mhm.
things, I mean, this too shall pass, and I'll get out on the other side a stronger person.
Right, right. I think that's really important. And I don't think we use history enough as a tool to actually understand ourselves, and that sense of identity, that sense of groundedness that arrives out of knowing who our ancestors were. I think in our community as well, Mariam, if we have an honest conversation about it, we realize that we haven't been made to feel proud of our past. We had the Western gaze under which we grew up, which told us that we as Indian women, or Indian people in general, of people of Indian descent in general in South Africa, We were stereotyped in all sorts of ways: dishonest, corrupt, uncouth, unsophisticated, and we've been aware of that gaze as we were growing up, and we've also been aware of that gaze being reinforced in terms of stereotypes by the media that are produced within the Indian community. And we actually need to stop for a moment and say to ourselves, how real are these stereotypes? Are they actually legitimate? Do they really depict who we are as a community right now in this time? Do they reveal the incremental success that we've had over generations because of the dedication of our ancestors to improve the lives of their children? Or do they fail to reflect who we actually are? And that's what in my view, we need to re-find, rediscover our identity, breaking through the clutter in order to get to the core of who we are or who we could be and who we are now expected to be, what is required of us in this wonderful democracy that we are trying to build, what our role is in nation building and social cohesion, how we ought to call out racism, gender-based violence, and all the bias and misogyny that exists against women in our society, classism that may emanate from remnants of our casteist past. All of these elements are very, very useful for us in the present. And I think that we ought to tap into these tools in order to live as more productive and better citizens.
And understand each other. So talking about the racism and also to understand each other, for me, you highlight a very important point in terms of the British in the ingenious way, in terms of wherever they go, they divide and rule. It was their policy of
Yes.
dividing and ruling. Even if you look at India in terms of prior to this, Muslim and Hindu people living together, they were family. You lived in neighbor, you lived next
Yes.
to each other, or even you shared rooms and you were together, and there was no issue until the British came and made you aware that you're not, you Hindu and you Muslim. But then when indentured laborers came to South Africa, as you say, the British said, if you don't work hard enough and bring this profitable venture for us, we'll simply bring in the indigenous people. And then they turn around to the indigenous people and say, we don't need you, we've got Indian people. So Indians and Africans never looked at each other directly. They always look at each other through the eyes of the oppressor. We have inherited that gaze. We've been socialized into distrust that is based purely on the lack of knowledge about each other. And for me, this is 200 years ago. And if we look at the violence that happened in July last year and the distrust that turned violent as well amongst Indians and black people, and like you say, it was a deep entrenched distrust that we all in the same boat, just different sides of the coin, but yet this was entrenched in us, that
Yes.
we should have this divide. And for me, that's another important theme that you highlight in terms of this indentured labors, is this distrust that was created, that is still entrenched. Because today if you go to KZN and you interview Indian, maybe an Indian black, you can see that distrust is tangible. And this is important because
Mhm.
not only having conversations about our past, but also interracial conversations in terms of reaching out to black females, to Indian females, to say, our history, we were marginalized and oppressed, and we were made to believe you are our competition, but you're not. We've shared a difficult journey, and we're in this together, and we need to unite for the future of our children.
I love
So
the
I think.
idea of that, honestly, Mariam.
I thank you for highlighting that as well. So it's not only about our Indian past as descendants of those that came via passage to India to start a business or come as endangered laborers, but also to build this interrelation, because we always see racism as black and white, but there is a distrust amongst, and it portrays itself very ugly in July. And for me, it's important that we start building and healing and understanding we were all oppressed. We were all in this boat of oppression. And now that we have our liberty, we have this democracy, we need to reach out and understand each other and remove that mistrust.
That's such an important exercise for us as South Africans now. The July looting revealed that real fault line in our society. that we need to explore in more detail. And for me, part of how we solve that is going back to have a look at how this relationship and this impression of each other was formed. Do we still buy into the idea of this mediated gaze, where the British describe us to each other, and we take their word for it, essentially, where we refuse to experience, as members of the Indian community, refuse to experience Africans ourselves on a most human level, invite each other into our intimate spaces, sit at each other's dinner tables, and have the conversations that we need to have. It always amazes me when we see our children at university together or at school together, and we say, "Oh, this is great. My kid has friends of all different races, and this is wonderful." And then, your daughter actually happens to fall in love with one of her friends, people, and after she's done with university, whatever, she brings him home and she says, "Mom, people and I are in love. Dad, we want to get married." And then all of a sudden, it's not acceptable anymore because a line has been crossed. And for me, there's a great disjuncture there, that we will allow each other only so far and no further into our lives. In order for us to be a properly integrated nation, that's where the barrier's got to be broken. It's got to be broken in the intimate spaces. And we've got to do the hard work as a nation. And I think literature is a beautiful tool for this, Mariam Mia, to be able to use a kind of launch pad to talk about these difficulties, to travel back into the past, to say, what are the strains that were planted in the past that have traveled through into apartheid in order to be more amplified, and have traveled through into democracy to continue to show their harm in modern day South Africa. How do we start stripping those things away? If we have to talk about Indian racism towards Africans, we must do it. If we have to talk about the prejudice that now exists between Africans and the distrust towards Indians, we must do it. There is the vocabulary to have these robust discussions in a respectful way that doesn't end in violence or hatred. And literature actually gives us a beautiful space in which to be able to do that, where we can step away slightly from our own situation, and we can look at the plot and how it unfolds and the characters and how they speak to us. And once we've analyzed that, actually transfer some of that to our modern day lives and say, well, this has a certain relevance for us today. These are the lessons we can learn from literature set in the past. And these could potentially be very useful lessons for us in the present and the future.
Definitely, to shape our future. And I thank you for this novel, Children of Sugarcane, because you've sparked many conversations on different levels, and also not only conversations at different levels, you've allowed myself to introspect and to think about issues that, as I said, I didn't apply my mind to prior to me reading about the book and your personal journey, and it got me thinking. So we thank you for this book, because for me, as you say, literature provides, for me, it's a safe space. It's a genre that provides a safe space that we can speak about this. People sitting around. I'm thinking of book clubs now that's happening via online platforms, Zoom, Google, Microsoft Teams, etc. And it's going to spark conversations, Joanne. And I thank you for this, because I think it's important. Yes, I don't know if it's the same, So you all sit with your mug of coffee and whatever and have these over Zoom, but hopefully we can resume now that things are getting easier. We can resume book club and have these. And this is a difficult conversation, but I think it's an important conversation, because it it defines who you are. And as you were speaking, I thought, what, as a family, we were blessed because my sister couldn't have children, and she from birth adopted two children of African descent. And I love, it's the same love. It's the same love I have for my other nieces and nephews. In fact, maybe a little more, because I just grown so attached to them. So the color or the background, who they were, didn't make them less of that. The love is the same. The love is the same. And I thank the Almighty every day for blessing us with them, because it allows us to experience that. And then, as you said, my son came home, and again he wanted to marry somebody. that was a different race from him, and it was an
Yes.
interracial. And then again, she's my daughter now, and I've embraced her, and
Mm.
I love her just as much as I like my other daughters in other family family members. So I feel blessed that the Almighty has given me this opportunity to actually find different forms of love, and to see people that love is colorblind. It transcends your culture, your race, your belief. It's colorblind, and
Absolutely.
relationships are colorblind. And I wish everybody has this blessed opportunity to actually experience this, because only once you experience it, you come to realize it just puts so much perspective in that. At the end of the day, we all beautiful we are inhabitants of this beautiful mother earth. And you know what, if we reach out, we all the same essentially. We have the same
Yeah.
wants, desires, needs for our families, for ourselves, in terms of this. And I think we need to have these conversations so we can transcend this and remove all those chains that are holding us back.
Oh, I so agree with you, Mariam Mia. And thank you so much for giving me the space to talk about Children of Sugarcane and for appreciating the book and also for your beautiful personal story, which I found very uplifting. Thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure, and we will find Children of Sugarcane online, is in ebook as well as in most bookstores. Is it
Yes,
already out?
yes, yes, it is. It was launched in October, so it's available in all the big bookstores, online, Loot, Take a Lot, you name it. All of them have it.
Okay, so at book club, all of those you who are listening, if you haven't read Children of Sugarcane, please make it on your must-read list soon, because I'd like to be a fly in the wall on the conversations after you've read the book. That going to be? And I think, Jane, you also would love to be the fly on the wall to listen to the beautiful conversations that are going to emanate from here. I know it's going to be heated, but afterwards, I know all is going to end well, and that's thanks to Joanne Joseph. Uh, Radio personality, television personality, and now accomplished author. Love to catch up with you sometime in the future as well. It was been an absolute pleasure being a
Thank
guest. Thank
you.
you for your time here on Salam Media.
Thank you so much, Mariam. Yeah, lovely speaking to you.
A pleasure. We're going to take a short break, and then we're going to be speaking about Matrix, a second chance.